Okay, well, thanks for coming to my talk. And, well, I am truly honored to be invited here because this conference has been a lot of fun for me so far, so thanks a lot. Oh, this talk is about how to nap the most. There's a napping competition, and I'm going to tell you how to win. This talk is not about health, but it's about how to make good investment decisions. And I think that if you prioritize napping, that's a good idea. So I'm going to explain why, but I'll just give you a spoiler right away. You should prioritize napping as you make, like, before you make decisions, you should prioritize napping, because if you don't, you're working against your own long-term best interest. So a lot of the conventional wisdom that we learn growing up is for working, because you have to make money at a job. That means you have to work. But the habits you need to be a good investor are kind of the opposite in some way. So this is about why laziness is good. I don't know if there's anything really original in this talk, but this is stuff that needs to be repeated. People need to be reminded of this sort of thing regularly. And if you fall asleep while I'm talking, that's good. That's a compliment. That means that you have absorbed the message. So I'm Daniel Krawisz, and in 2012, some of my friends, I got some of my friends interested in Bitcoin in a libertarian group, and we kind of decided amongst ourselves that anybody who is a libertarian should probably just get a little bit of Bitcoin and then, just in case, and then not worry about it. And if it works out, then they'll be rich. We learned a lot about Bitcoin in our discussion groups. And then when we finally engaged in the Bitcoin community, we were like, wow, this place is crazy, okay? They really need our ideas. So we decided to make the Satoshi Nakamoto Institute page for two basic reasons. One was that there was kind of a sentiment in Bitcoin to put the cypherpunks under the rug, kind of forget about them, because they're too controversial. Like, nobody would buy Bitcoin if they knew it was anarchist. And the other reason was that we didn't see a lot of Austrian economics in the Bitcoin world, which was kind of surprising. So we wanted to bring that in. So one thing that I noticed in Bitcoin is that everybody is very anxious all the time. There's always some kind of thing that people are worrying about. And usually it's something that doesn't seem to make any sense. So that's why I started writing articles. So people would say, like, there are too many hoarders. People are hoarding Bitcoin. So I wrote an article called "I'm Hoarding Bitcoins and No, You Can't Have Any." Because it's, maybe Bitcoin would fail, but it's certainly not because people are investing in it, which is just what hoarding is. And people would say, Bitcoin is too volatile. That's terrible. So I wrote an article called "I Love Bitcoin's Volatility," because it's like, I'm twice as rich again this morning, so that's horrifying, That's kind of what I would write about. Also, I should mention I work for a company called Stash Crypto now, and we're about to release a new version of our wallet, so you should go check that out. I forgot to say that right at the start. The advice that we wrote about at the Satoshi Nakamoto Institute was very good, because basically every article I wrote said, just stop worrying about this thing and just keep holding the Bitcoins. And if you had followed our advice and bought Bitcoins in 2013 and then just not done anything, you would have done great. You would have done better than most people who tried to do something else. And that's kind of the key, because our advice was not perfect, but it was very good and it was very easy to follow. And people who try to be perfect usually don't do as well. Okay? So the best advice that I ever gave was in a comic strip that I published in 2013, which probably most people didn't see, so I'm going to show you some of that. And here's how it begins. This is kind of my character, and this person represents, the other character represents the guy who is always interested in the latest thing, who is always excited about whatever the new thing is. And he looks like Garfield because he's totally boring and unoriginal. That's kind of why I did that. So here's my best advice ever. I said, that's all you have to do is buy all the coins you can and then take a long nap. And it's kind of obvious that I wasn't thinking that this was my best advice ever at the time, because I just kind of have it buried in here. So I made a new version of this panel. This is the new version. It's more clear. Okay, so feel free to use this. And so recently I've kind of been thinking back. Why was this the best advice? Why, like, I would never have had to even write an article if I had just said that. It's almost would have been more efficient to just do this and not write about all of the specific topics I did. Because one of the problems that I had is that the scams kept evolving. Okay, Bitcoin is like, you know, there's one great idea at the center, and then everything else is like traps that are trying to get you on your way to the Bitcoins. Okay, and the scams kept evolving. So first we had altcoins, and I remember when Litecoin, when I first learned about it, I thought, you know, this isn't going to last very long, but I was wrong about that. And then people started making app coins. So now we have all of this ICO craze, but these are basically app coins. Anyway, I wrote articles about lots of different things, but there kept being new twists, you know. So my friend Michael wrote an article called "Everybody's a Scammer." So that was very good, because that is kind of that's more abstract, right? You just kind of say, everybody is trying to trick you into taking on more risk than you need to. So everybody is a scammer. That's kind of a general problem that you always have to deal with no matter what happened. But anyway, this is my best advice, and I've been trying to think about why it was so good. So here's what I came up with. If you prioritize napping when you make your investment decisions, that forces you to be an independent thinker. And it forces you to be more intelligent, okay? Because you are constrained by the need to be able to fall asleep at any time, okay? And that forces you to avoid risk. And it prevents you from getting excited by con artists who are trying to, you know, get you interested in something without you thinking about it enough. When you are considering making investment decisions, you need to think about, you should invest like you have narcolepsy, right? You should think like, if I were to just fall asleep randomly, Nothing bad should happen. I need to invest in a way so that if I had narcolepsy, I would be fine. Okay? And the way you do that is, you have to decide, you have to have your own ideas about what you're going to get excited about. Okay? So if some outside force is trying to get you excited, you need to resist that. You need to go into situations already with some kind of preconception of what kind of thing you're going to get excited about. And if you don't have that, then you're easily manipulated. So if you prioritize napping, then you are constantly distancing yourself from the situation. And you give yourself a chance to think more on your own. And you also have to be more creative about how you invest, because often the more abstract kind of investments are they make it easier to nap. So for example, I really like the show Bitcoin Uncensored, and back before they split up, the two people who made the show, they always used to talk about index funds. And most people can't do better. Well, nobody can do better consistently than an index fund, right? So index funds are good for napping because you just buy it, and then the economy grows, and then you wake up later and you're richer. You don't have to think about it. The index fund should kind of be like your default. It's kind of like your null hypothesis. And it's good if you don't know anything. If you don't know anything, you can buy the index fund. Then if you do know something, you can buy something more specific. Okay? Okay, so if you want to have the kind of peace of mind that allows you to take naps a lot, you need to avoid risk. Because if you're too risky, then you're anxious and you can't sleep. So if you prioritize napping, you have to avoid risk. And that's good because it's easy to forget to avoid risk. Okay? Risk is always, the risk of an investment is always less obvious than the potential benefits. It's more difficult to think about because the person selling you the investment certainly isn't going to make the risk obvious, is he? He's going to make it look as good as possible. So you have to think on your own to figure out what the risks are, okay? And risks are dangerous because over time, risks matter more than potential gains. And the reason for this is your net worth is always closer to zero than to infinity, right? So there is always a chance that you will make enough mistakes in a row to bring you down to zero, or down to a point where you can't invest anymore. And even if you don't go all the way to zero, it's hard to recover from a series of mistakes in a row. It takes a long time. And eventually that'll happen, right? Eventually the risks will compound and you'll make enough mistakes in a row so that you're at a point where you can't recover. But in the short term, the people who take risks, or at least some of them will do a lot better. But eventually, as time goes on, the more risky people will be eliminated, even if they go after bigger gains. So what you should do is you should try to look for the best gains subject to the constraint that you can nap a lot. And that will force you to think about the risks so that you can have peace of mind so that you can sleep a lot. The lazier you can be, the better. Let's see. Now, now I was thinking about why is this such a particularly good idea for Bitcoin? And I think that the reason is Bitcoin is the kind of thing, it's kind of like an index fund. It's kind of the kind of thing that you would want to get if you wanted to take naps, okay? If Bitcoin reaches its potential, if it gets, if it gets big enough that it's at, its equilibrium point, from that point it will kind of grow with the economy because it'll be used for staying liquid, okay? Because, an investor wants to be liquid some of the time, and then he moves into stocks when he wants to take risks, right? So the need for so Bitcoin will serve the need for liquidity, and that will kind of that's dependent on the size of the economy, right? So that's what Bitcoin will be for. So it's kind of like an index fund. It's kind of like a thing you would buy that'll just go with the economy, and you don't have to think about it. The only difference is that if there was a stock market bubble, an index fund would go up, whereas, with the stocks, whereas Bitcoin wouldn't, because a stock market bubble means that people are systematically moving out of cash and into stocks. And if there's a crash, then an index fund would go down, whereas Bitcoin would not. So in general, if you don't get into Bitcoin with the idea that you're going to sleep a lot, it's kind of like what's the point? It's not really doing its job. So I tried to think of somebody from mythology or literature who would exemplify this principle, who would be like a role model. Okay, so I found a new role model, and that is Tom Bombadil. He's my new favorite role model. He is like the best investor, okay, because he refuses to take on risk. He lets other people do it, okay? So if you're not familiar with, he wasn't in the movie, okay, but if you're not familiar with him from The Lord of the Rings, what happens with Tom Bombadil is that he's not affected by the Ring of Power. He puts it on and he doesn't care. And he won't join in on the quest to save Middle-earth. He just says, whatever, the orc problem will take care of itself, okay? So he just wants to stay back in his magical forest, okay? And that's what I like about it. And everybody in the whole world, but especially everybody in Bitcoin, is trying to trick you into taking on more risk than you need to. Okay, they're trying to get you to go on their quest. Okay, and this could be my second greatest advice right now is never trust Gandalf. Okay, because he's the one who's telling Frodo to take on risk, right? He's like the con artist. Whereas Tom Bombadil is like somebody who is diversified, because he says, humans win, orcs win, I'll be fine either way. That's I think that's the best mindset for being an investor. Now, examples. So I think that this attitude is great for being in Bitcoin, but it's great for kind of everything, too. Now, this is a political conference, so I'll talk politics. One of the ways that the ruling class stays in power is they trick the people, the working class, into taking on risk. And then they don't take on risk. So in the United States, a few years ago, we recently had Ron Paul trying to get elected to the presidency, right? And lots of people put a lot of work into the campaign. And then nothing happened, okay? So they took on risk, and then all of that work was lost. And then they got discouraged, so they all voted for Trump the next time around, okay? So by contrast, there was a great talk earlier today about anonymous insurance companies. Now that's great. That's a way that ordinary people reduce risk, and they make the government take on more risk. That's how you win. So you trick the other person into taking on more risk. So I really like that one. Well, I'm through with my notes. How much time do I have left?
It's okay with time. So if you have more, what do you want to say? You can, or we can do Q&A.
Well, let's do Q&A. I kind of got through everything. I hope you thought that this was useful. I mean, I'm not really sure, if I really, made my point very well. This is just what I've been learning recently myself. So.
Okay, thank you, Daniel, for your interesting presentation. So now is the time for questions. I will take the first because I hold the mic. You obviously think that the Bitcoin is the one. Why do you think so, and why not other coins?
Oh, okay. Oh, well, so first of all, my definition of Bitcoin is all of the chains that derive from the Bitcoin Genesis block. So I don't think that the Bitcoin core chain is exclusively Bitcoin. I think that investors decide which chain is going to be the most valuable one, and that whichever one that is, that should be called Bitcoin. And the reason that Bitcoin is the one is that it was created first, so it had more time for the network to grow. So if an altcoin were to defeat Bitcoin, what has to happen is the entire group of Bitcoin investors has to sequentially take on extra risk by buying the altcoin. Not saying that that's impossible, but that's a big hurdle. And I don't think that I don't think that any of the altcoins are really showing that they can pass that hurdle. I think that they're mostly trying to make people not think about it. Okay, so you have to. People have to systematically take on risk one by one until they've all moved over into the altcoin. And that's very unlikely because the smaller network isn't as good at being money. The best money is the one that the most people have agreed is money. And well, Bitcoin is beating the dollar because people know that they can evade capital controls and do all kinds of other things with it. But an altcoin that was going to defeat Bitcoin would have to have it would have to be as much an innovation over Bitcoin as Bitcoin is over the dollar. Which again, not saying that this is impossible, but that is that's a far-fetched proposition.
Yeah. Question over here. I have one comment and one question. So regarding your latest statement, that reminded me of an article in Forbes from 2007 or 2008, where the author made a proposition that MySpace is the ultimate social network, and due to social network effects, nobody will be ever able to compete with MySpace because everybody is on MySpace already. But we know what happened then. So I mean, I would be careful with the proposition that Bitcoin is first, and that's why it will remain the best one forever. And the second kind of comment or question is that even if you make the point that risk should be avoided at all costs, despite the fact that kind of people have their own preferences over risk versus reward, even if you define your goal as avoiding risk, like any Finance 101 course will teach you that diversification of your portfolio is the way to make the risk lower. But if you, like, why are you so sure that Bitcoin acts like a cryptocurrency S&P 500? Like, maybe you should make your portfolio more diverse. And the guy who followed your advice in 2012 and bought Bitcoin and slept till now, for example, missed an opportunity to invest in Ethereum, which grew 1,000 times.
Right. Well, I don't. Right. Well, nobody can be perfect, right? The idea is you have to. There was too much in that question. What was the first? The first thing was about MySpace, right? So the difference between social networks and Bitcoin is the value of the network is what it is now. Okay, and the value can change over time because it can add ads or something, right? And then it becomes more annoying. And like, whereas the reason that a currency is useful is that you can hold it for a long time, right? It's about having old stashes of coins that makes it
a little bit like the main part of the question that I really want kind of you to answer is why do you think that Bitcoin acts as an index fund in cryptocurrencies?
That was the second one.
Yeah, this was kind of the main question.
Okay. I didn't make my point clear. What I said was that, or what I was trying to say is that if Bitcoin reaches its potential and it gets, it reaches its equilibrium point, then it will act like an index fund for the whole economy, okay? Because people will move into it to be liquid, and then they'll move into stocks when they're done being liquid. And people have their own preferences about risk, right? And I'm not saying that you should avoid risk at all cost, but my point is that people don't think about the risks as much. It's easy to fool yourself and forget about them. But if you prioritize napping, you have to think about them, because you can't feel good enough to look away and just sleep for a while unless you feel like you've taken care of everything.
Next question, please. Is there any questions? Because if not, I have several. So think about your question. You talked about that in some time in the future Bitcoin will be in the equilibrium because it will reach the saturate the economy. So I would like to ask you, what is, in your view, your target equilibrium price for Bitcoin, or if you do have any heuristic about this, how large Bitcoin can get?
No, I don't have a target. I mean, I guess how would you tell? That's a good question. How would you know when it reached its equilibrium point? I mean, I guess I would say if I start to like some stocks better than Bitcoin, that's when I think it's reached the target. I just don't know how you would tell when it reached its maximum point. Like so far, I don't see anything that's limiting it particularly. But yeah, I've been watching for that. I don't know the answer.
Well, the maximum target point I can think of is like the size of the global economy, like $80 billion or $1 trillion.
Oh, sure. Yeah, it would be proportional.
So this is like what I can imagine.
Yeah.
Maybe it could be even more valuable because the economy will grow in that time. So, but then I think of the use cases like in black market and the part of economy can't be regulated really. So maybe 10% or 20% of this global economy. If you have any ideas about that or?
Oh well, yeah. The target should be proportional to the size of the global economy. I just don't know what the what the proportionality would be, but yeah, it should be something kind of like that.
Okay, thank you. Still no questions because I have two more. Okay, I heard you argue about altcoins that we really don't need them. But that we don't need this bad experimentation and scams around. But in my view, it's like natural what must happen. I view it if Bitcoin is like a sand, and we need to build tower. We really can't put one grain on next and expect that it will be stable. We need the pile of the sand and to keep the top of it. So I see all the experimentation and all the altcoins. We need to like saturate all the paths to every bad thought, bad experiment, before we can really come back to Bitcoin and say, okay, it was Bitcoin from the beginning. Oh, so what do you think about this? Because you often say that these are all scams, altcoins, or next to scams, and don't invest them because they have no value.
Right. Well, I mean, obviously, I'm not against people creating new cryptocurrencies and trying to get them to succeed, but I think that the people, pumping the altcoins are not giving me very good arguments to want to buy them. And I also think that forks of Bitcoin are better investments than altcoins. So people should have been forking Bitcoin instead of creating altcoins this whole time. Okay. Yes. Question.
So if I pick up, we ran across the hostel several times yesterday and today.
The what?
We ran across in the hostel several times yesterday and today. So I came to your presentation. But if I look at your message, it's basically be confident and trust and be passive. And I think you can outperform this by doing an active management and being an active manager, just knowing what you do, and even reducing the risk by hedging, not putting all eggs in the Bitcoin basket. And the question is, the art is basically to define and to develop how you do this, how you select the interesting projects, when you get in, when you get out, and what your strategy is. And
yeah, okay. So I agree with everything you said, and I would say that what you're talking about is what you need to do to be confident, other than active management. I mean, but you need to have your strategy, your exit strategy, and you need to hedge, because that makes you know that you're fine even if you make a mistake. So I guess what much of what you were talking about is, you know, exactly what you would need to be able to take naps.
So, thank you. Next question is here behind the pillar.
Hi, thanks for the speech. It was great. What do you think is the biggest obstacle for Bitcoin in future? Is it like technical thing? Is it a legal thing from the governments? Is it monopoly from the miners? What do you consider like a biggest problem?
Oh, well, yeah, the biggest problem, I think, is I would like to see a more investor-controlled Bitcoin, because right now I don't think that the way that Bitcoin development is getting enough input from the investors. So what I would like to see is there should be an options market for forks of Bitcoin, so that we know, or for future forks, I should say, so that we know what rule changes will maximize the value of Bitcoin. And that's how we know what to do. So I think that the investors should make the plan, and then the developers should implement it. And of course, maybe the developers make the best plan, but the only, the thing that would be most convincing to me would be to see that the investors agree with the plan, on the options market or prediction market. So Paul Stotz told me that a prediction market is equivalent to an options market in some way, but I haven't learned enough about it to know exactly how they're similar. But we should be able to see that a proposed rule change is going to make Bitcoin more valuable, and then that's how we should know what to do. And you can't really have an option for Bitcoin rule changes unless you do hard forks rather than soft forks. So I like hard forks better because that gives me investment options to say what I want.
So speaking of the forks, I read your recent article where you took the position about Bitcoin Cash. If we should sell it, if we should sell Bitcoin, and your point was don't sell anything. In long term, you will be on the winning side either.
Oh yeah. So I really think that what's happening in Bitcoin now is another trick to try to get people to take investment actions they don't need to do. Because to me, if people can fork Bitcoin and you can just stay diversified, then you just say whichever wins, great. And people say maybe someone is going to try to corrupt Bitcoin by changing the rules, but to me the value of Bitcoin is its ability to enable people to resist capital controls and inflation. And if somebody were to fork Bitcoin in a way that made this impossible, then that fork would not be valuable. Whereas if somebody were to change the rules in a way that made it better, then that one would succeed, and it should succeed. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, I was just asking about your inactive position, which is quite in agreement what you said.
Oh yeah, actually I should have mentioned that while I was talking, but I missed it. So thanks for asking.
So If there is not another question, I would like to thank Daniel again for the talk and